Well, we're going to get started now. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ishika Katari, and I'm the founder and executive director of Take Action Inc. I hope you all are well and healthy during these difficult and unprecedented times. Part of creating meaningful positive change as an activist is being the change by holding oneself accountable to live ethically and sustainably, especially when it comes to fighting for climate justice. So I'm excited to introduce our inspiring presenters, Shiv Goel and Daphne Prakash from One Up Action to present on the importance of sustainability and their amazing project called Green Period. Shiv is a youth climate activist and public speaker with a specialization in sustainable fashion and economics. Shiv has worked in and around the environmental nonprofit industry, having lobbied Congress with the Citizens Climate Lobby and works in One Up Action International's administration as Deputy Director of Operations. He is a co-founder and executive director of the recently launched Green Period, an organization that works to streamline access to eco-friendly brands and raise awareness about sustainability. Daphne, now a rising senior in high school, was a firm believer in climate justice, but never took action until the climate strikes of September 2019. Inspired by the countless youth demanding an urgent action, she realized that it was time to step up and get involved. She is currently the Partnerships Director at One Up Action and has worked with other organizations such as Climate Youth Climate Strike, Apple Through Earth, Zero Hour, and Sunrise Movement.
Alrighty, awesome. Thank you so much, Ishka, for having us and for giving us this opportunity to present for you all. So let me share my screen real quick. So yeah, this is it, sustainability. Before I tell you all about who I am, really like why you should listen to me, I want to show you this. It's an image that most, if not all of you, have probably seen before. It's called the Blue Marble. The Blue Marble was the first picture actually ever taken of the entire round Earth, and believe it or not, it wasn't taken by a satellite. It was taken by a human being, an astronaut, aboard Apollo 17 in 1972. Interestingly enough, no one actually knows who took it. They just know when it was taken. And I really want to show you why we're all here today, and that's this. That's this beautiful, round, perfect marble of a planet that we are so lucky to call home. Vice President Al Gore actually begins every single one of his presentations for his climate reality leadership trainings, one of which I was fortunate enough to be trained at, with this image. Now, most definitely not Al Gore, but I was really impacted deeply by the history and gravity behind this image, no pun intended, and I wanted to share it with you. There are those that actually believe this is a digitally rendered image and that humans never landed on the moon, not the Earth is flat. But I honestly love the mindset of flat earthers because it seems like they're a lot more concerned with the state of the Earth than most people. And a little bit more about me and why you should care about what I'm saying. And like, don't care about what I'm saying because of who I am, because I'm really nobody. I want you to care about what I'm saying because what I'm saying matters for the sake of the planet. So for those of you who don't know, which I'm assuming is most of you, as Ishika mentioned before, my name is Shiv Goel. I'm a youth climate activist and public speaker, having given over a dozen presentations on climate change. And so my passion really does lie with sustainable fashion, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, I want to introduce you to two amazing organizations that I have had the absolute pleasure of working with. The first is One Up Action. One Up Action works to provide resources for underprivileged youth so that they can better get involved with the climate crisis. I'm fortunate enough to be Deputy Director of Operations at this amazing organization, and I'd like to give a special thanks and shout out to the Director of Partnerships, Daphne Prakash, for connecting me with Take Action Inc. to give this presentation for you all today. Now, more recently, I co-founded Green, also known as Green Period, with my good friend Jack Osmond. We work to streamline consumer access to environmentally friendly brands and products using our website, greenperiod.org. I'm the executive director at this incredible organization, and I look forward to all the amazing things to come for both Green and OUA. And now that you know who I am, I want to talk to you about why I'm here and why we're all here, and that's this planet. Sustainability, the topic of this whole shebang, is defined as the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. I know it's cliche to start with a definition, but I feel this is something that's really impactful and pertinent to what we need to be talking about, right? And sustainability as a technical term can be applied to tons of different contexts, like business models, lifetimes, products, and most importantly, at least in my opinion, is the environment. And for something to be environmentally sustainable, I really find it needs to meet a single criterion. And that's that it does nothing to degenerate the environment, or if it does, it compensates for that loss. My parents just finished up a construction project in our backyard, spanning back like 2.5 years, like clearing everything out. And part of that was we had to chop down some trees to clear space for a fence and to grade the land. But luckily, our town mandated that we planted an equal number of trees back to make up for that harm we did to the environment. So we we degenerated the earth in that way of chopping down the trees, but we planted them back, and we actually planted back more. And so, by definition, sustainability means keeping things at a constant level, and as such, not fluctuating, which I think is kind of BS. I believe that sustainability is a farce, right? We shouldn't be talking about sustainability, and rather, we need to be talking about rectification and making up for the mistakes of those who made them so that our earth could be generated the way it is today. Now, for those of you who don't know, global warming is causing all kinds of havoc across the globe. To make things simple, carbon emissions create giant holes in the ozone layer, which is a shield in our atmosphere that protects us from UV rays. As the ozone layer is decimated, the sun's heat impacts our planet more directly, melting ice caps, causing droughts, and even tropical storms. Now, look at these images from NASA of the Arctic from 1979, and as time goes on, see how the ice caps slowly melt. And that's because of ozone layer depletion. We skip all the way up to 2019. Look how little it is compared to 1979. That's just a span of, 30 years? Now take a look at this Samoan refugee, whose home and livelihood were destroyed by Tropical Storm Gita in 2018. Even if we do go sustainable now, we would still be seeing a world of horrors like this poor soul had to face, right? Instead, we need to repair and rectify the damage that our ancestors have caused. Not only do we need to improve the way that we live, we need to help reestablish our world's ecosystem. Now, I've been spouting a lot of negativity, right, with very little solution. I apologize for that, but now we're getting to that. And that's how do we solve global warming with sustainability and rectify our mistakes? And I want to try a small activity, and I want us to take us to a problem, right? Let's take overfishing. And I want to solve it right here, right now. First, I want to explain another issue for you guys, and that's pollen allergies. I live in New Jersey, where an enormous chunk of the population is allergic to pollen. Pollen comes from trees, and as more initiatives to plant trees arise, my allergies get worse, which has literally been the only argument I've seen actually used against planting more trees. And I want to introduce you guys to a really interesting concept called botanical sexism, right? It's literally tree sexism. And essentially what it is that botanists historically have chosen to plant male trees heavily over female trees because female trees produce seeds and pods that are supposedly difficult to clean up. And they find pollen's easier, you just wipe it off. Instead, the pollen from male trees is spread around. Pollen is meant to inseminate female trees to produce those more trees, right? But with so few female trees, and thus nowhere for the pollen to go, it covers anything and everything. And it causes all those seasonal allergies that I and my fellow New Jerseyans so despise. And the reason that I bring this up is to showcase how careful we need to be in coming up with and finding solutions. So that, as important as the development of solutions is, we have to be careful that there aren't any adverse effects. Now back to fishing. Why is overfishing a problem?
Oh, well, because we're destroying habitats. Yeah.
Yep, it destroys ecosystems, right? The less fish there are in the sea, the less able those same fish are able to reproduce. And that makes the food supply, by definition, back to the words, unsustainable. Now first let's figure out how we could prevent overfishing. Then let's figure out how to directly rectify these fishermen's mistakes and add more fish to the ocean.
I guess part of the reason why fish are so in demand is because of the value for it, I guess.
Yep.
So if there's any way we could combat that, maybe it would cost people to fish less.
That's a great starting point. Actually, there's an interesting concept called environmental economics that deals a lot with how values and market effects directly impact the environment and what doing things in the environment causes change in the stock market and in prices for just regular products. So literally what Daphne suggested, right? So how could we combat the value of fishing, right? Overfishing happens because fishers want to fish more and make more money. That's their living. So maybe we could say pay the fishers the difference between their regular fish haul with overfishing and the cap that we subject them to. We say you can only fish this amount each season. But how would we get there? We would have to make this a law. And how do we do that? We lobby Congress or get elected as a government official, petitions, etc. Now, then we would have to take a portion of the fish and farm them to make more fish and put them back into the ocean if we want to rectify those mistakes. At the end of the day, we're talking about a lot of money. Now, solving problems takes actions via quantifiable measures. For this, like overfishing example, we needed to lobby Congress to make overfishing illegal and incentivize fishers not to do so. Then we needed to pay a farm to harvest the fish to put back in the ocean. And how do we do that? It starts with you. Creating change and solving problems can only happen based off of your own individual prerogative. If you're able to step up and do something, then do it. Creating a more sustainable future does start with each and every one of us today. Supporting organizations with your social media and money is great, but there's so many unsolved issues out there in the world that you can solve by reflecting on areas of your own life that do need to be solved. Now, that kind of reflection is how organizations like Green and One Up Action were born. Let's talk about these organizations. One Up Action was founded by a close friend of mine, climate activist Kevin J. Patel. Kevin has been a major proponent of producing change in the world around us and ensuring that all voices are heard within the fight. Kevin has been an organizer for various nonprofits in the environmental community, including Fridays for the Future, Zero Hour, and Climate Strike LA. He also started the world's very first Youth Climate Commission, which is an organization that works directly with local governments to enact change in one's community regarding climate solutions by establishing a governmental body of local youth. Through Kevin's journey as an activist and leader in the environmental justice fight, Kevin actually found that many voices were being excluded from the scene. He founded One Up Action to take a stance on this issue, and he truly enacted change to help marginalized youth become involved with the movement. Now, Kevin found an issue near and dear to his heart, and he acted on it. Kevin really is a huge inspiration to me personally, and his mentorship and friendship are some of the major reasons why I was able to start Green. If you're interested in joining One Up Action, you can head to oneupaction.org to see how you can make a difference. Now, a little bit about Green. I'll tell you about where Green came from, where the idea and how it started actually. Now, I'm a devout Hindu and have been for my entire life. And as a crucial aspect of my religion, there's worship of cows. And thus I've never actually eaten beef. People always ask me, oh, you've never had pepperoni, steak. I'm like, no, just, I don't know what I'm missing out on because I've never had it. And likewise, growing up, I was always kind of confused why the people around me, like parents, cousins, friends, who are all Hindu, use leather products. Now, during the summer of 2018, this especially bothered me, and I decided to distance myself from these practices by cutting animal products out of my outfit, and I also stopped eating red meat completely. But doing this, I found myself sifting through hundreds of blogs and brand websites advocating for their products of choice, right? If you look up eco-friendly wallets, you're going to find 20 different mom blogs saying, oh, here's my favorite one. It's made out of banana leaf paper, right? I have this one that's made out of a recycled bike tire. And I wanted to find things that I liked and that would look good and that were sustainable, but it was so difficult because there were just so many options and no way to really locate and find exactly what I needed. And especially, one really common argument against sustainability is that sustainability is a privilege, which oftentimes it is. You know, the average pair of board shorts created with ethical and or recycled materials is around like $70 to $80 a pair, which is a lot, right? Now, through my search looking for vegan clothes and vegan alternatives like wallets, I noticed a trend of these vegan leather products simultaneously advertising themselves as eco-friendly and or sustainable. After looking into the effects of leather production and fast fashion on the environment, I realized just how important making a change is, right? I realized, hey, like the textile industry is actually creating enormous adverse effects on the environment and on the workers. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So on this kind of tangent, I founded Green, which, like we said, works to turn the textile industry green. We do that by consolidating information on these brands in one place, and we make it easier for you to find things that you actually like. My girlfriend and I were actually talking yesterday, and she says to me, Shiv, I found these really cute sandals. I want them. Now, I'm an advocate for sustainable manufacturing, as you all know, and I'm always talking about it. So she's a little annoyed by my spiels by now. And she goes to me, Shiv, I know what you're going to say. You're asking me, are they eco-friendly? And she goes, no, they're not, but I want them. Then she actually does research without me asking her to, using our website, and finds out the exact company she was looking at has a line of sustainably produced sandals. By promoting companies that are conscious of their environmental impact, like that sandal company, we hope to shift the consumer market to account for carbon footprint with our list of environmentally friendly brands, which at this point is the most comprehensive in the world. Now we have 16 incredible youth volunteers from across the country who pour hours of their time each week into optimizing our organization's impact. Again, if you want to join us, you can head to green-period.org. So that's green-period.org. Like Kevin, I found an issue near and dear to my heart, and I strove to solve it. Sustainability does not come easy. Oftentimes, sustainability can be a privilege. It's difficult for those in low-income communities to spend extra money on fresh fruits and vegetables or clothes made from hemp or recycled materials. That's why Green strives to make sustainability as accessible as possible by sorting products and brands by price points, with functionalities coming soon to assist customers with shopping consciously on a budget. To make your daily life sustainable, I really do recommend using our website. I'm a little bit biased, just a little bit, but in all seriousness, I do think that it is an extremely helpful resource that hundreds of people already have used to make their purchases. If you want to check out our website, this is what it looks like. It's in development. Our great web development team is doing all kinds of amazing stuff. You can look at brands, footwear. You can look at how we sort these different brands with our classifications. You can check out our amazing team. Oh, that's me. Oh, and One Up Action right there. Now, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about fast fashion specifically. Here's a short video on fast fashion and why it's bad.
Hey, it's Kristen, and this is fast fashion in 5 minutes or less. Fast fashion is used to describe cheap, trendy clothing that are very quickly coming in and out of style. Many fast fashion retailers introduce new products multiple times in a week in order to stay on trend. Just go into your closet and check the labels on your clothing. Chances are most of them are from fast fashion brands. So how did fast fashion manage to take over our closets and become so successful? It's said that fast fashion is a response to a huge market of consumers that are demanding high fashion at a low cost. But the truth is that fast fashion retailers are actually creating that demand because selling a shit ton of clothes is really profitable. But how exactly do they maximize their profit? Well, instead of replenishing their stock, they replace the items that sell out with new items of a different style, making our older clothes outdated and unfashionable, and also making us constantly want to keep shopping for new, trendier clothes. Because fast fashion brands are constantly hunting for new trends, many times they steal and copy ideas from independent artists. They use advertising to stay relevant and further promote their constant changing trends. But the worst part is that they use cheap labor that is often sourced from sweatshops, which are factories where workers are employed at inhumanely low wages for long hours and under poor working conditions. For example, in Bangladesh, sweatshop workers will earn $33 per month, which is way below the living wage of $60 a month. They're forced to work from 14 to 16 hours a day in often hazardous working conditions. Since 1990, more than 400 workers died, and thousands have been wounded in 50 major factory fires. Female workers also face sexual harassment and no access to maternity leave. Factory management in many cases prohibits the creation of trade unions, which prevents the workers from defending their rights. Workers are also exposed to harmful and carcinogenic chemicals, and child and slave labor are also prevalent in sweatshops. Fast fashion also comes at a huge environmental cost. Garment production in unregulated factories has resulted in toxic chemicals often used to create vibrant colors, prints, and fabric finishes. These chemicals can enter our bodies through our skin. They also harm the workers, and they are dumped into streams and rivers, polluting the water and soil of nearby areas. Because fast fashion is so cheap and disposable, consumers are throwing their clothes away at unprecedented rates. 5% of all landfill space is textile waste. On average, every US citizen alone throws away 70 pounds of clothing every year. Brands also choose to incinerate their old stock rather than donate it because they claim it ruins their image. According to a recent report, the textile industry emits more greenhouse gas emissions than international shipping and aviation combined, and with some reports even claiming it's the second dirtiest industry in the world. Fast fashion takes fashion victim to a whole new level. And if you are a fashion victim, stop it. Get some help.
Stop it. Get some help.
To get started, watch my video about how to quit fast fashion right here, and also check out my
That's a short video on fast fashion and how it harms the environment. I personally find that to be a really helpful resource, and I just wanted to share that with you all. Now, I want you all to take a look at your clothes right now, right? Look at the tags, tell me what company it was made from and what country it was made from. Go ahead. For example, I have this shirt from Bangladesh from H&M, and it was fast fashion, but I bought this before I really understood everything that it was about. So can you all tell me where their shirts or stuff were made from?
I think my sweatshirt is Hanes, and I'm pretty sure it's made in India.
Yeah, Hanes in India is a really great example, right? A lot of those sweatshops in the world are concentrated in South Asia, where people are working on living wages of literally like dollars a day, like maybe $5 now, less. A lot of times in India, it's like barely rupees, you know? Now, I don't want you to be ashamed if it was made in a sweatshop. Some of my shirts were too, like this one from H&M, and I bought them a long time ago before I understood the importance of shopping consciously, and I acknowledge that ignorance. Likewise, I want you all to acknowledge where your wardrobe came from. I want you to acknowledge that it was produced unethically, and that its manufacturing harmed the environment and the individuals who made it. I want you to forgive yourself. And, you may feel like, oh, shoot, this is made by, sweatshop workers. I feel bad. And if you feel that kind of shame, I want you to release that shame, and I want you to replace it with this kind of newfound knowledge about the textile industry. Ishan said American Eagle from Vietnam, exactly. And I want you to replace it with this newfound knowledge. I want you to promise to yourself, not me, that if you're financially able to, that you will shop consciously, and that you'll try to, Now, I meditate every day. Like this, meditation is a process of self-forgiveness, like what we just did. The idea of meditation is that you're supposed to focus on your breath and not think about anything else, but that's nearly impossible. Everyone's mind drifts and wanders and settles on thoughts that are sitting in the backs of their minds, and it's important to release yourself from your own mind. Meditation requires you to forgive yourself for wandering off and return to focusing on your own breath, and even feeling accomplished that you were able to do so. Now, I want you guys to try it with me. For me personally, meditating over quarantine really helped me reconnect with the environment and my purpose in advocating for a better world. I love meditating, and I think it really does help, especially with those involved in the environmental community. Daphne knows Kevin loves meditating, and we do it at every single one of our admin team meetings. Now, you're probably wondering why I just tried to turn you into a hippie. I did that because sustainable living is about so much more than just wearing ethically made clothes. It's about living that kind of life with internal tranquility and being one with the environment. And meditation really, really did help me do that. And I hope that at least to some extent it did the same to you guys. Does anyone have any reflections on the meditation process? How it felt?
Yeah. I always love meditating. I feel like it's a really great way to kind of reflect on your day and kind of recenter yourself,
Yeah, definitely. And like we were talking about, that's really a lot about what meditation comes down to. It's about finding your center and reconnecting with nature and your surroundings around you. That was redundant, but that's okay. Let's talk a little bit more about sustainable living. There are so many easy steps you can take on a daily basis to do so. Now, vegetarian diets actually produce 2.5 times less carbon emissions than non-vegetarian diets. Fun fact, it takes 542 liters of water to produce a single chicken breast. You heard that right. That's enough to fill your bathtub 6.5 times over. I'm not telling you to go vegetarian, and I'm most definitely not. I love chicken. But I am asking you to be conscious of your diet and try to eat as many vegetarian meals as possible. Studies show that unless we start being more conscious of our diets and how much meat we consume, we actually won't be able to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of reducing our global warming rate down to 2%. And that's problematic because we need to be meeting those goals if we want to ensure better safety and better world for our future. Now, I know, another video, but I feel that this just explains it a lot better than I can, and that it's pretty comprehensive about why better diets.
I have to admit that when it comes to food, I'm a total sucker. Whether it's sugar or grease or carbs, pretty much bring it on. And I spend a lot of time in Montana. So for me, that medium rare grass-fed ribeye steak, pretty much as good as it gets. I know, I don't do it often. And when I do, I gotta admit, I feel a little conflicted. And that's for a lot of reasons, including the planet. But how big of a problem is what I eat? I mean, does it really make much of a dent in something as huge as global warming? It turns out what we put on our plates matters a lot.
About 25% of all the global climate change problems we're seeing can be attributed back to the food and the choices that we're actually making about what we eat on a daily basis. This is greater than all the cars on the planet. In fact, it's about twice as much global warming pollution as the cars.
Ben Holton and Maya Almaroz study the connection between climate and diet at the University of California, Davis. They track how the way we produce food creates greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. With that data, the team has crunched the numbers to figure out how much carbon pollution is produced by different foods and different diets.
A lot of people feel really helpless when it comes to climate change, like they can't make a difference. And what our research is showing is that your personal decisions really can have a big impact.
So take that grass-fed ribeye steak I love. If you really look at everything that went into making a single serving of beef, you end up emitting around 330 grams of carbon. That's like driving a car 3 miles. Now, if I choose to have chicken instead, there's more than a 5-fold drop in emissions. Switch to fish, and you see the number go down even more. Now, look at veggies. If I swapped beef out entirely for lentils, well, I'm down to practically nothing. So why does beef, and lamb too for that matter, pack such a powerful punch to the planet? Livestock accounts for a little over 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If that sort of seems low to you, consider it's about equal to transportation. We're talking all the cars, trucks, planes, trains, and ships on the planet combined. This is partly because ruminant animals like cows and sheep, they're just gassy. And the methane they produce is at least 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Plus, it takes a lot of land, fertilizer, and about 1 billion tons of grain to feed all that livestock.
And you could feed 3.5 billion people with that grain. If we were just directly eating these grains ourselves, it would eliminate a lot of the CO2 that's emitted from cattle production.
So it's clear that meat has a pretty big carbon load. But it's also worth remembering that not all livestock is raised equally. In parts of the American West, for instance, ranchers are working to raise livestock in ways that actually help restore the land. And they're experimenting with ways that soil and grasslands can be used to keep carbon pollution out of the air. But even these sustainable ranchers will really tell you we're probably eating too much meat.
I know a lot of people who, if you don't serve them meat for lunch or dinner, they're kind of like, well, when is the meat coming out?
It's to the point now where the U.S. actually has one of the highest meat footprints per capita. So what about not eating meat at all? Vegan is the way to go for the least impact on the planet, but it's not that much different in terms of emissions than, say, a vegetarian diet. And the team found that the environmental impact of the Mediterranean diet is pretty similar to vegan and vegetarian diets. It's a lot less meat-heavy than what Americans are used to, so fish and poultry a few times a week, beef maybe once a month, plenty of plant-based foods, and of course, loads of olive oil.
Eliminating like 90% of your meat intake is more important than eliminating all of your meat. We don't all have to be vegan. We don't all even have to be vegetarian. If we can just reduce our meat intake, every little bit helps. And if you can bring it down a lot, you can help the climate a lot.
If we all just switched to a Mediterranean diet, it could actually solve 15% of global warming pollution by 2050.
If everyone were to move toward it, that is equivalent to taking somewhere around 1 billion cars off of the streets in terms of vehicle emissions each year. So that kind of a footprint is big time.
But say you still want more meat than the Mediterranean diet recommends. Just cutting down your portion size to the doctor recommended 4 ounces can reduce your emissions by half. That's huge.
In fact, the doctors are telling us we're eating about twice as much meat as we really need for a healthy diet.
The good news is we are listening to our doctors. In the last decade, there's been a 19% drop in the amount of beef we eat.
All these things that you're already being told are good for you also happen to be good for the planet.
So what we eat really is a big part of the climate puzzle. I mean, we may not all be able to afford an electric car or putting solar panels on our house, but we all have to eat every day. And these choices we make can add up to really big numbers. And since meat has a pretty big carbon load, we need to be thoughtful about how much we eat. As for that ribeye steak that I really love, I am honestly trying to cut back. Maybe just a smaller piece of steak, or simply swapping out a meat dish for a veggie burger. It may seem like a small thing, but it really does add up to big impacts.
So again, like he kept mentioning, you don't need to go vegetarian to make an impact on the environment. I'm definitely not. I love chicken wings, my favorite food by far. But controlling your portions and making sure that you're at least conscious of like your meals and how many times a week you're eating that can definitely help. And it really may not seem like it's making much of a difference, but it takes efforts from everyone to really make that difference in the environment. One common argument to not following a sustainable lifestyle is that since not everyone's doing it, you're not really making a difference. Like if I stop eating meat, why does everyone else have to keep eating meat? But that's just so inherently false. The more that people like you and me convert to sustainable lifestyles and educate others about why it's important, the more that corporations will begin to realize that the general public is concerned for the environment and demands change, right? If, like, say a population of 2,000 people suddenly stops eating meat or lowers their consumption of meat over a course of a few months, then corporations will likewise have to lower their production of meat and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases and the amount of water it takes to make all that chicken or all that beef. Now, I'm sure another like really simple, easy, common way of living a sustainable lifestyle is recycling. And I'm sure most of you recycle, but did you know that you might actually be recycling wrong? You know, your Starbucks cups are actually lined with this thing called polyethylene. It's basically a plastic that lines the inside of your paper cups to make them waterproof and make them heat proof. So that makes recycling them near impossible. The recycling machines actually have to take the polyethylene, separate it from the paper, and then recycle them both separately. So that's really expensive and a waste of time for a lot of recycling machines. So instead, you should be throwing your Starbucks cups out just in case, because the polyethylene inside can actually contaminate the rest of your recycling and send it all into landfills. Likewise, whole pizza boxes should almost never be recycled, as the grease on top makes them non-reusable. Instead, what you can do, a lot of the grease a lot of times sits on the bottom of the box because it like soaks through the pizza. You can cut the pizza box in half and just recycle the top and throw out the bottom. Now, plastic grocery bags actually clog up recycling machines because of how they're made and how they're constructed. So it's oftentimes a really bad idea to recycle them. Instead, you can just reuse them for carrying your personal items, and that's just a great way to, reduce, reuse, recycle. Similarly, receipts are actually not recyclable at all. They're made of paper, but the receipts that you get from these grocery stores and all those other stores contain a carcinogen, the stuff that's in like cigarettes that causes cancer. So this cancer-causing chemical is called bisphenol A, also known as BPA. Recycling receipts means that the carcinogen gets mixed with other paper and contaminates the pulp, making it completely unusable. It makes it toxic and bad for the environment and bad for you when you touch it. So actually, after you get your receipts, you should a lot of times rip it up, throw it out, and then immediately wash your hands because BPA can cause cancer. And you actually shouldn't be recycling shredded paper. This one actually surprised me a lot too when I found out about this a few years ago. Now, a lot of times if you have like these kind of important personal documents that if you have to print them out for the bank or whatever, it'll have your name and your credit card numbers, whatever. And so shredding them and then recycling them is a really common practice for people. But that's really, really bad because the small bits of paper are actually considered unusable to recycling plants because they get lost in the process and get stuck in cracks and jam the machinery. So they just a lot of times throw out the paper. And, sorry, another box video, but again, this goes into more depth about recycling specifically and how that happens and why you need to be careful.
There is nothing like a hot cup of tea in the morning. That is until I'm done and I have to decide what to do with my cup. Can I recycle it?
Is it a trick question?
Yeah, this is a great question.
And I just figure you can recycle anything that's cardboard-esque.
That's not right.
I can't recycle this?
Knowing what you can and can't recycle isn't easy. The rules depend on where you live, and there are hundreds of products and materials where the rules aren't always clear.
Pizza boxes.
I hear that that's not recyclable. I don't know if that's like a legend, an urban legend or something.
Paper towels.
My roommate and I actually have this discussion where I'm like, I'll throw paper towels in there, and she's like, I don't think you can recycle that, and she'll pick them out. I'm like, I don't know, it's paper.
Bubble wrap mailers.
I don't know, this is so hard.
The confusion means that things that are actually garbage still end up in the recycling stream. About 25% of what Americans try to recycle can't actually be recycled. Waste management experts say what's going on here is something called aspirational recycling. When people are unsure if an item can be recycled, they recycle it because it feels like the right thing to do. And while our intentions are good, this behavior isn't harmless. Even small amounts of contamination can turn entire hauls of otherwise recyclable materials into trash. And the problem has been growing. The rate of recycling contamination more than doubled in the last decade. So why is this happening? Well, it's at least in part due to a major shift in how Americans recycled. Beginning in the 1990s and 2000s, municipalities implemented single-stream recycling programs. Paper, metal, plastic, and glass no longer needed to be sorted. They could all live in one bin. Communities quickly adopted the practice, and by 2014, 80% of all curbside recycling programs in the U.S. were single-stream. The problem is, there's evidence that when we put all our recycling into one bin, we're more likely to throw trash in there along with it. Take two neighboring counties in Florida, for example. Palm Beach County, where residents must pre-sort their recyclables, had a contamination rate of only 9%, while Broward County's single-stream program had a contamination rate of 30%. Single-stream recycling takes the responsibility to sort off of the individual and shifts it to materials recovery facilities, or MRFs, where trash gets sorted from recycling by machines, but also by workers, who often have to remove waste by hand. Pizza boxes contaminated with grease, electronics that aren't processed at standard recycling facilities, even the likes of Christmas lights, animal carcasses, and bowling balls. In Portland, workers remove thousands of dirty diapers every month. In a perfect world, everyone would just know how to recycle correctly. But short of that, there's something we can all start doing differently right now. Unless you are absolutely sure, don't recycle it. In fact, recycling education campaigns encourage the opposite. When in doubt, the best option may be to throw it out. Most people want to do the right thing, and sometimes the way to be a good recycler is to throw stuff in the trash.
I actually have a question for you. So sustainability is a privilege, meaning that many people are not able to afford, for example, like organic food compared to a bag of chips, because it can be considerably expensive. So I know that Green Period works to make sure that sustainable products are accessible, but can you talk a little bit more about how we can change this culture and the market to ensure that there is more like long-term change in that we will have products that are both accessible and sustainable, or is that too much to ask for?
Well, you're right. That is a really, really great question. And as you mentioned, like one of the main talking points of sustainability is how much of a privilege it is, right? And so organizations like Green and One Up Action work to try to make the climate crisis fight more accessible, but with things like consumer products, that's not really in our hands as of yet. So one of the main purposes of green specifically is we try to help drive the consumer market so that these different companies are counting at a higher rate for sustainability. So we have all these companies, right? Like if you like, I don't know, 8,000 Kicks or Cariuma. These are companies all like dedicated to manufacturing with sustainable materials, but a lot of times those do tend to be more expensive. So when more consumers flock to those kinds of companies and show the market that like right now there is a preference for sustainable materials, other companies in turn that like may be, relying on fast fashion manufacturing, they'll say, oh, hey, look, consumers want sustainable stuff. Let's give them that. So they'll produce their own sustainable clothing lines and in turn make things more accessible. So one of the main things like we keep talking about, like, oh, if I shop sustainably, why can't everyone else? Why just me doing it makes a difference, right? And so that kind of like cult mentality of if everyone's doing it at once, then you're actually forcing corporations to account for their own carbon footprints and show consumers that they care.
Following up on that question, participating in activism can also be a privilege in that, historically speaking, middle class is often the one involved in activism movements because they actually have the time and the resources to advocate. Well, can you talk a little bit more about One Up Action and how it actually empowers marginalized groups to take action?
Yeah, definitely. So One Up Action, as we mentioned a little bit before, is the exempt purpose of One Up Action is to provide resources for marginalized youth to get involved. So they have a bunch of different programs to do that. They have a Changemakers program that gets local youth involved with making actions with One Up Action's help and resources. We provide different kinds of webinars and resources. And we have this thing that I mentioned earlier called Youth Climate Commissions. And so what that is, Kevin J. Patel, the founder and executive director of One Up Action, he started the first Youth Climate Commission in the world because he noticed a lack of youth and marginalized communities' voices within, setting up legislation for climate change, to combat climate change specifically. So he set this up so that, it was easier for youth to get involved and for marginalized youth to have their voices really heard in the fight. And One Up Action does so much work in, providing microgrants and doing all kinds of work to help get marginalized youth involved. Daphne, if you want to expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so we have our chapters program where we have, different people around the world in the country working on their own little like projects and trying to expand and educate on climate, justice and awareness. So yeah, what One Up Action's like main thing is providing resources. So when, people come to us with solutions, it's like, what can we do to make that happen? What's the next step from there? So, that's what we're really all about, having, people with these solutions and ideas and like giving them, the power and the ability to execute that.
Thank you for answering that question. There's a question in the chat saying, recently there's a boom for making organic products. There are people who are making paper from elephant poop. Do you believe that more products as such should be completely replaced by normal paper?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for that. And I think that is definitely something that does need to be acknowledged, right? So one of the main concerns about the environment has been, since you probably learned since literally elementary school, is conserving paper and saving the trees. Paper comes from trees, and the more that people use paper, the more that stuff like that is getting cut down on. But luckily, with a lot of things moving online and a lot of resources and moving completely online, like Zoom classes and stuff like that, there's a lot less necessity to be using paper. And so with that, there is generally a lower demand in paper products than there was, say, 10 years ago, even though we have a higher population rate. And so one of the great things about the digital age is exactly that we're helping conserve the environment just by, attending the Zoom meeting virtually instead of, say, if this was an actual workshop and you wanted to fly out like 100 miles to see me, which you wouldn't, but, just for an example. And so, yeah, at the same time, though, you do still have to acknowledge that paper manufacturers are still cutting down trees and doing that. And so making paper from things like stone or elephant poop definitely can be, a great alternative if you're able to. But like we were talking about a lot earlier, sustainability really is a privilege, and these kinds of papers are exorbitantly expensive. So it's just a lot of things that need to be weighed individually on where you stand and what the best options for you are.
And also just a labor reform and reforming child servitude. So do you believe that by creating this new market of sustainable goods and eco-friendly consumership, do you believe that we will be able to improve working conditions and ensure that there's less child servitude involved in the world?
So one major concern from people when you're arguing about sweatshops is they're saying, oh, having sweatshops are really benefit to the socioeconomic ecosystem of these areas, right? They're providing tons of jobs and providing tons of money for these people who otherwise wouldn't have ways to support themselves, which is really, it's true, honestly. And so I think at the end of the day, you need to consider all aspects of that. And when we're raising awareness about sweatshops and the working conditions, I think, at least for me personally, I believe that definitely the sweatshops need to have better working conditions. I think that's really the main purpose. And child labor definitely does need to be, looked at and say, oh, hey, this is wrong. But we also need to consider the different laws and different ways that other countries work. We're talking about this from a very almost ethnocentric perspective, since we're all from the United States, I'm assuming. And so we're not able to really kind of empathize with how those child laborers are working and what that means for them. But so yeah, there are a lot of different aspects when you're looking at sweatshops and child labor. But I think at the end of the day, like you said, as we raise more awareness about sustainable manufacturing, likewise ethical manufacturing will increase, and at least the working conditions should improve for these different workers in foreign countries.
Any more questions? We have about 2 more minutes for questions, so I would try to use up the time. I also want to clarify that we actually have another workshop on child servitude specifically in the United States. So not only does it exist abroad, but there are about 50,000 child laborers in the United States.
Okay, as we're wrapping up, and if people have any more questions, here's where you can find us all online. So you can find my socials here, you find Green's socials here, and One of Actions. So definitely I'd recommend you check them out, and especially if you want to get involved, look at the websites. There are links in the bios of all these social medias, so yeah.
Yeah, to end this workshop, I would first like to thank Shiv and Daphne and One Up Action for an amazing informative presentation, and you all for taking the time to learn and take action. I really hope that you learned something about sustainability, climate change, recycling. I know that I did, and cleared my preconceived notions. Our final workshop of this activism series is Sunday, August 30th, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with ballot ready to learn about how to vote informed and get ready for the upcoming presidential election. For more information, check out www.takeactioning.com and follow us on social media at take_action_ing.